Thank you for listening to the TROI podcast, where we promote, educate, inspire, and entertain creators of all things related to fantasy and science fiction. In episode 2, I interviewed DJ Butler, whose works include Rock Band Fights Evil, City of the Saints, and the Dragon Award-winning Witchy Eye. Hi, my name is Carson. You might not also know me from some of my videos as Forge with TROI. I have on the call with me David Butler, also known as DJ Butler. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Carson.
Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us what you've written. This is your promotion. What do you want everybody to know?
Check out how cool and sophisticated this is. So my name's Dave. I write fantasy novels. I publish with Baen, but also with Wordfire Press and Immortal Works and Knopf. My most recent thing is The Jupiter Knife, which is book 2 in a series here. It came out, and I was just telling Carson it's set in Moab, Utah. This is a series set in the Great Depression, and it's about a man who is a sugar beet farmer and wizard, and uses his traditional magical lore to battle the evils of the Great Depression.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, pretty well reviewed, and doing all right. Book 2 just came out. It ends pretty excited. It ends with it ends in a climactic knife fight underneath Delicate Arch.
Oh, really?
Arch's monument, yeah. Although it wasn't being called Delicate Arch at the time. In fact, it's got a long history of name changes. At the time, it was being called things like the Cowboy Chaps and the School Marms Bloomers, and even Pants Crotch was a name.
Really?
Had. Yeah. And then when they wanted to put out kind of more official maps and give it a sort of less rude name, it was actually supposed to be Landscape Arch, but whoever was doing the map accidentally switched the names on Landscape and Delicate Arch. But yeah, it's that iconic arch in so many calendars, sort of freestanding. Story ends in a knife fight there.
I think Cowboy Chaps.
Yep.
Cowboy Chaps is stuck.
The Witchy War is a series, 4 books out now. It's really 2 trilogies. There's a complete trilogy, and the second trilogy is started. That's an epic fantasy set in a 19th century America, and it's about a young woman who is at the Nashville Tobacco Fair, selling her family crop when Imperial Army officers try to kidnap her, and she learns that she is the secret hidden daughter of the dead empress, and the living emperor is a usurper and a fraud and a murderer, and her uncle, and wants her killed. It's about her recovering her family's power and wealth, and her contact with her father's lost goddess. So this has been I've been very lucky. Book 2, Witchy Winter, won both the AML Award and the Whitney Award. Book 3 won the Dragon Award for alternate history.
Nice.
So so I feel very good about that. I've got kids series, The Extraordinary Journeys of Clockwork Charlie. Here's book 1 and book 3. Book 2, the cover fell out of my filter. I don't know why. But that's about really what it is a steampunk action adventure rewritten story of Pinocchio. It's about a boy whose father is kidnapped, and as the boy goes to try to rescue his father, the boy realized that he is not a flesh and blood boy. He is a machine, and was in fact built to be a kind of a weapon. And then I've got various other novels from traditional and indie publishers. I've been writing for my whole life, but I started seriously trying to publish about 11 years ago, I guess.
Okay. So do you know how many novels you wrote before you got published?
Well, the first thing I wrote was junk. The second thing got me an agent who dumped me a year later. Oh. But then my wife did a sort of rewrite on it and picked up a book deal, although it never got published. So let's see, 1, 2. The third thing I wrote was probably Witchy Eye, but that was not published. Definitely wrote City of the Saints after that. It might have been so my first traditionally published novel was was The Kidnap Plot, book one of The Extraordinary Journeys of Clockwork Charlie. It might have been something like my seventh book I wrote. And before that got published, I had self-published City of the Saints. So I had a novel. In fact, I might also have self-published Creshling by then. So I had a couple novels out in the indie space.
Okay. I think this is good for future authors and wannabe authors, because a lot of times your first book doesn't get picked up, but it can lead to other things. Like you said, Witchy Eye was written a while ago, like your third or fourth book, and it didn't get published till how many years later?
Yeah, so I wrote Witchy Eye in like the spring of 2011, and I would have to double check, but I think it came out in 2017. Yeah, that in fact, that manuscript, the editor who bought it had actually had the manuscript for 4 years.
Oh, really?
4 years to the month, until she finally wrote it and said, "Oh, yep, I want to buy this." So yes, so my career is full of many morals for other writers.
Don't give up, man. Really.
Don't give up. That's true. That's a fair moral. No one, look, in this market, there are many ways to publish, and there are more ways to publish all the time. I think that's going to continue. The only thing that can stop you from publishing actually is you. It's your decision to give up is the end of your publishing career.
Right. Yeah, there's very many people who have self-published, done indie publishing, and have been very, very successful. So,
sure, and I think a lot of people have kind of a hybrid model too. Writers who are sort of mid-list writers who are doing okay in traditional publishing, but if there's a book their editors don't want to publish, or maybe they want to have just kind of a different connection with their readers, you'll see them also self-publish things at the same time. And you shouldn't imagine that it's all T-bone steaks and roses. I think it's still the case that the vast majority of books that are published either by traditional publishers or through an indie channel are basically read by nobody and sell 50 copies or fewer. I know many people, this is sad, I know many people who have written a book or two books or three books and then just given up because they just said this is just too hard.
right. That's a lot of pressure on somebody if they're trying to make it in and they get the 50. That's discouraging.
It is, and I think people also, I think many people come in with false expectations.
Yeah.
And they come in and will say, yes, I understand. J.K. Rowling was a fluke. That doesn't really happen. It's going to be a lot of hard work. But in their heart of hearts, they think that something like J.K. Rowling or Stephanie Meyer is going to happen to them, and they read those books and say, I'm as good a writer as she is, or I'm as good a writer as Stephen King or whoever. And that may even be true, and it simply doesn't matter. And then people run into the hard reality that for most writers, putting a book out is really just one step in a process that began years before with beginning to write, and continues on for years with more and more writing and also promotion and cultivation of readers and many other things.
Right. And what we talked about before, because of I wouldn't say easiness of the way to get books out, but it becomes more saturated because people can go, well, I can write this book in however long and get it out, and I can write, so many words a day.
I think easiness is true. And I think there's another issue too, which is that the availability of things like OCR software and the way intellectual property laws work, so that there's just kind of a trail behind us where, depending on the country, you go back by about something like 70, 75 years, and everything written before that, anyone can publish. So guess what? All those things are never going to go out of print again, because it is easy. Someone just needs to go to a secondhand bookstore, get a copy of a book, scan it, and a couple hours work, and use GIMP for a cover, and boom, they've got a copy of Dumas or Jules Verne or Shakespeare or whoever they want up on Amazon for sale.
Right.
And so what that means is, now you compete against every writer who ever lived. The number of people you're competing against gets bigger every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And it is because it's easy and cheap. And the easiness and cheapness has a glorious side, right? It's a golden age for consumers. There's a ton to read.
Yeah.
But golden ages for consumers are rough on producers. And so it means you're competing against more and more people, and it's harder and harder to get a significant significant amount of attention.
Right. That saturation, it can help, but it can hurt. That's for sure. So let's talk about you. What about your writing habits? Do you have like a word goal that you do every day? Do you write a certain amount of pages, or just sit down and go, okay, from 9 to 12, I'm writing. However much I get done, I get done.
So I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, answering kind of a similar question. And he was asking about reading habits. He said, man, when do you read? And I said, listen, my life is like Donkey Kong, okay? You're like, oh, here comes a flaming barrel. I have to jump over it. Grab the hammer. Oh, go up the ladder. Nope, jump off the ladder again. Hey, the floor is moving. Here comes another barrel. And I don't have any kind of habits, really.
No?
There was a period when I first started where for about 2 years, I would get up every day, take the kids to school, and I would write my word count goal, really page count goal. And depending on the book, that would be a chapter or half a chapter. So for a kid's book, it would be 8 pages, but for a young adult, it might be 10 or 12. And for an adult novel, it was, probably 12. That's no problem. Get up, write that. That's 2 to 3 hours. Then do kind of social media and stuff. Be done with the writing by the time the kids came home. I did that for a couple of years. I look forward to doing that again. But I'm making a living other ways now. I'm a corporate trainer, and I'm actually an admitted lawyer, although I basically don't practice law. And I'm a partner in a small mergers and acquisitions consulting business. And so I write when I can, and I write when I have to. Deadlines are very useful to me, and I will set aside weeks where, okay, there's no other work here, so I'm just going to have to write 16 pages a day. I'm just going to have to write 25 pages a day every day for these 2 weeks, and that'll be that'll be a third of the book, right? And I have been able to do that. I have been able to be basically productive. Last year, I wrote 2 adult novels, one 200,000 words, one 100,000 words, a kid's novel at 50,000 words, and a novella at about 30, plus maybe 8 or 10 short stories. So I was actually pretty productive, not as productive as I wanted, but not because I am writing every day, which is how I would prefer to do it, just because when the flaming barrel came at me, I said, okay, now I have to jump over the flaming barrel, and what it's going to take is 25 pages a day for the month of January. And so I would write that much.
So do you work from an outline? If you have only this concentrated amount of time that you have to do, or are you able just to sit down and just write and go with it?
I always work somewhat from an outline. These 2 books are actually outlined pretty thoroughly because I had a co-writer. And so we spent a month having hour-long phone calls to kind of plot out chapter, starting first at a high level using a Hollywood 3-act structure kind of plot outline, and then ultimately to a chapter by chapter outline. And then we just wrote, we each wrote half a book over the course of a week. Much more typically, I have a kind of a partial outlining sort of process where I will I won't start a book till I know how I want it to end. I know what the climactic scene is, and I know the big things that have to happen on the way. And usually I know kind of, all right, here's kind of a big marker about a third of the way through, and here's a different big marker 2/3 the way through, or for Witchy I actually plotted it out. The first draft had 30 chapters, 30 chapters, and there was basically an action climax every 5th chapter.
Oh wow.
And each one was a higher climax, so it was like 6 steps up.
Mm-hmm.
In editing, it turned into 29 chapters. 2 chapters got pulled together, but still, it's basically got a 6-part kind of structure. So more typically, I will know the big mileposts, and I will know what the subplots are and how they have to go, and I will also have outlined the first 5 chapters or so, and then I'll start writing, and I will keep working on the outline as I write, and the outline usually grows a little bit ahead of the book. So it's not, strictly speaking, seat of the pants, or gardener writer where I just plant and see what comes up. But it's a more kind of a flexible outlining approach than a Brandon Sanderson-ish sit down with a spreadsheet and plot out every single thing.
Okay. What about what's your editing habits like? Are you how many times do you have to go through a book before you're like, okay, this is what I want to send off?
So back in the golden age where I was doing this sort of more full time, so I would actually, before writing my 12 pages for the day, I would edit the previous day's chapter. And as I write, I find that I have ideas, and I go, I need to go plant something in chapter 2. I need to change this dialogue. And when I was able to write like that every single day, I just made those changes as they happened. So I'd get to the end and have basically a manuscript ready to go. Now I tend to usually have to write sort of more quickly and under deadline duress. So usually I'm accumulating notes. I'm writing as if I write them by hand. I don't, of course. I put them in like an Evernote file.
Mm-hmm.
I accumulate notes, and then I go back and do usually just kind of one pass through, and then submit to my editor or to my agent. Then Bain is usually kind of one editorial pass, and then kind of a couple of passes that are more in the nature of line edits, check for typos and things like that. So, you look at my Bain novels, most of them have probably had basically 2 editorial passes, plus polishing. That's probably pretty typical. Knopf had more like 4. It's Random House. They just, were more regimented about it.
Uh-huh. I've talked to a few authors that kind of do what you did in the golden age, where they would go back, read and edit the day before's chapter or whatever, and then go on. And I've seen the people that I've talked to that have done that seem to have less edits than just burning through, writing everything that's, trying to, throwing up on the page, and then have to go back and fix it, rearrange it, and try to come up with a coherent novel.
I think that is, that's the idea, and that's how it worked out for me. I think maybe some of the downside is, it took a little time every day. So in a scenario where if I only had if I was writing every day, but I only had an hour every day, I wouldn't want to spend 15 minutes editing. I just would want to write it.
Right.
Also, it did sometimes happen that I would write a chapter, then change it one way, then change it another way, then change it a third. Right. So I think that maybe in some cases holding those comments to the end might have resulted in less time spent editing. On the other hand, I also think editing what you wrote before is one technique to help you get started today. If you start by going back and reading yesterday and like, okay, fix, then it's easy to go, okay, now here's the first sentence for today, and just get started.
Right. It's a way to combat writer's block.
Yeah, where sometimes just looking at a blank page, people sometimes can feel intimidated or have a hard time making themselves get going.
Right. So you said you don't start a book until you have the kind of the big climactic ending.
No,
Like
usually, yeah.
how I'm sure you're probably like me and you just have a bunch of ideas in your head going around all the time. Like, how do you pick one like that, that's the one I want to do, or that you have enough of an idea to create a story from that?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I don't. So, um, so for example, I just changed back to these books to tell you
Mm-hmm.
all. So, Witchy, I did well enough that the publisher Bain said, "Hey, we'd like to get some more books from you." I said, "How about if I write you some pitches and show them to you?" And they said, "Great." So I put together 5 pitches. One of the pitches was for The Cunning Man, and I had promised Aaron Ritchie that he and I would write these together if they ever got written. So I reached out to him and said, "Hey, listen, this is, we're pitching this to Bain," and he said, "There's no way Bain's going to go for it." And I said, "Yeah, there's no way Bain's going to go for it, but let's do the pitch anyway, right?"
Uh-huh.
And I sent 5 pitches, and one of them was the idea that ultimately became the book In the Palace of Shadow and Joy, and then there was The Cunning Man, and then there's three other ideas, 2 science fiction and 1 fantasy, and she eliminated 2 of them, but The Cunning Man was still in. She had comments, and I called Aaron back and said, "You know what? This one is still in the running." He said, "She's never going to go for it." I said, "She's never going to go for it, but she wants some more details, so let's do some more details." So we did it. And then it was down to 2, and we did another iteration, and then finally, like, this was the book series she wanted. And I was stunned. This is about a Mormon wizard in the 1930s, and this is a national publisher. It is not being published by, Deseret Book or somebody, right? It's a
Right.
full-on book about spellcasting Mormons in the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a sense, I didn't choose that it was what was going to be written, right? The publisher chose. I'm perfectly happy, that it got chosen. It's been great to write these and to have them out. Hope we get to write more. But the publisher made a choice, and I've gone through sort of pitch. This is one of the ways having a publisher, having a traditional publisher differs from being self-published or having a small indie publisher. Is the publisher is trying to put out a portfolio of books, and so the publisher may not be interested in just whatever you write.
Mm-hmm.
Publisher may say, I need a science fiction novel. I need a detective novel. We are weak on urban fantasy, or, Dave, we already have 3 books just like this. So you're entering into a joint venture relationship, and you can't make your joint venture partner choose to publish.
Right.
So beyond that, before I had publishers, when I was just writing, it was really kind of a matter of what I wanted to write. And at first it was, so I wrote 2 middle grade fantasies, and then I said I want to write something for adults. So I wrote Witchy Eye, a big epic fantasy, and then steampunk had caught my eye, and so I wrote City of the Saints, which is a big steampunk novel, and it was kind of what I wanted to write. But and that still happens. So right now, I have to get a few things edited and turned out, but I'm probably in a position where there are no deadlines on me right now, and so I can choose what to write. And so there's a project I've been wanting to do for a few years that I will probably finally get to actually write.
Oh, nice.
And that's sort of just a matter of, I have other ideas. This is just kind of the one that I most want to write, really. And it may be not commercial. Maybe the publisher says, "Yeah, not this one, Dave," and I have to self-publish it.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes.
I find that interesting that, not only to promote you, but they need to promote themselves. Like you said, we're weak in this sort of market and we want to get stronger in that. And so they're trying to, like you said, build a profile and try to be strong everywhere.
Yeah. Or we don't publish that. I think if I took Not, I think. I have actually done this. This is not hypothetical. If I take a young adult novel to my publisher, Bain, they will simply say, we don't publish young adult novels.
Right.
So, you need to go find somewhere else, some other way to publish this.
Well, that's a thing that I think, wannabe future authors need to kind of realize, like, just because you got rejected doesn't mean that your work is bad. It just means that, that could be it, but it could be the publisher's not looking for something like that right now, and you try again. Or you can ask them, I don't know if you can, but yeah, you can ask them, what are you looking for? Maybe I got something else that's like that.
You can always ask. There's no reason, you need to realize from the start and always bear in mind that you are not somebody's employee as a writer. You are the owner of your own business.
Right.
So, if you're talking with a publishing business and they say, well, we don't want this one, it's completely reasonable to say, okay, can you tell me what you're looking for? What kind of thing, if I brought it to you, would you be interested in? They may not be able to give you a good answer, or maybe in fact they don't want to tell you the truth, which is they just don't like your writing or whatever, right?
Right.
So, but yes, you ought to be able to ask. I absolutely agree with that.
Fantastic.
And I think there are many reasons why a book gets rejected by a publisher or a writer gets rejected by an agent that have nothing to do with how good you are. An agent may pass because she just can't figure out how she would sell your book, or she doesn't know anyone she could sell it to. She might even think someone else could sell it, but just not her. Those are not her contacts. People get dropped for social and for political reasons and all kinds of things other than, oh, this is a good or not a good book. That's almost not even a relevant consideration.
Interesting. So yeah, keep trying, I guess, if you
yeah,
if
that's
you have
it.
rejection.
The career is over when you give up. That's it.
Yeah. So you've written a few books of alternate history, and what draws you to that alternate history with in a fantastic setting, fantasy, in a fantasy setting?
I think all fantasy is really about Earth. Some fantasy doesn't realize it's about Earth. But Tolkien, for example, knew very well he was writing a Catholic proto-mythology for his own native England. And England is all over those books. I like working sort of relatively directly with the real world, maybe because I'm interested in the real world. I like history and language and mythology and anthropology, but also there's a storytelling advantage where working with real world people and events and places means that your readers have pre-existing information in their heads about those people and events and places. If you as a reader pick up a book set in Victorian England, you already think some things, right or wrong, cliched or accurate or whatever. You think some things about Victorian England.
Right.
And I'm actually rereading right now one of my very favorite novels. It's a spy novel called Declare by Tim Powers, but it's a spy novel. So it's about the real world man, Kim Philby, who was he was Great Britain's sort of greatest ever traitor. He defected to the KGB. But it's also about jinn, about genies, and it's about Mount Ararat, and it's the story in which Kim Philby and the main point of view character are these sort of magical twins involved in this long-running espionage action to try to kill the jinn who were accidentally awakened by an earthquake on Mount Ararat in 1883, and who have been among other things, it's one of the jinn who has basically the patron goddess of the Soviet Union. So it's like this Cold War espionage, John le Carré style story, but it's got genies and people performing these kind of dark acts of magic. And part of the awesomeness is that T.E. Lawrence is in it, and that it's set in places like Beirut and Armenia and Turkey, and involves things like the Enigma machine and Alan Turing, and also stuff that is just crazy over the top fantasy at the same time.
Interesting. I haven't read that book. I'd like to get it and read it.
It's very good.
That is an advantage, right, in alternate history, because then you don't have to, like, if you do, let's just say Wheel of Time, right? You have to create everything, an economy, the currency, the what they wear. Whereas if you do an alternate history, like you said, there's also that seed of reality in that, and you don't have to come up with quite as much stuff. And I find that when I write, sometimes those ticky tack details drag you down.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the web gives you a really great capacity to do research in ways that would have been just much more time consuming and difficult earlier, because there are historical reconstruction, reenaction enthusiasts who have YouTube channels and who will
Right.
say, look, let me show you how to cast your own bullets on a campfire, right? And here's the tool, and you got to get a little bit of flash off and use the clips to do it, like and you can see that in 5 minutes, and put it in a book, or you can find recipes or details about clothing and how it was put on, which is the kind of little vivifying details that I think really help a reader latch on to a story.
Right. And nowadays you have, stuff like Google Earth, where if you're researching a different country, you can go and look at it and see, like, okay, what's here, so I can kind of get the descriptions correct.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, for big famous sites like the Lascaux Caves, you can find photos. But absolutely, if you're just saying, I wanted this to be set in a nondescript little paesino somewhere outside of Rome, you can pull up Rome. You can surf around till you see like a little village that's kind of about the distance you want, and then you can drop that little guy on the street and just rotate and go, okay, what does it look like? Oh, hey, look, it's orange stucco. Weird. I wouldn't have thought it. We move further down. Oh, notice the little fences, right?
Yeah.
And oh, that's what you call a pharmacy in Rome. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's good stuff.
Yeah, we're kind of in a research paradise for writers, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Um, let's see, I noticed on your website that you have minifigures. Do you paint those?
Yeah, I do.
What do you play?
I'm in the wrong part of the house to really show it to you. So when I was a kid, I played some tabletop battle games, Warhammer. I don't currently play any of those. The miniatures I paint are mostly so I play tabletop role play, and which I did a ton in college and high school, and then didn't do for 15 or years plus. When I got back into it, I started with the classic Call of Cthulhu campaign, Masks of Nyarlathotep. That group grew as we played, so by the end there were like 10 people.
Uh-huh.
And then when we started this RuneQuest campaign, and RuneQuest is a fantasy game set in a sort of epic comic fantasy world of Glorantha.
Mm-hmm.
For the session 0 in that game, there were like 16 people that showed up, so I had to split it into 2 different groups.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I'm a game master in 2 different ongoing groups. One is basically my son's high school friends and a couple other kind of younger players, and they are still playing in Glorantha. The other group will come back to Glorantha. Glorantha is principally what I paint minis for. It's fantasy. It's because I think it's a lot of fun to put trolls and warriors who look like Greek hoplites, out on the board and scenery and buildings and stuff. With the other group, we played a couple games that we're actually playing right now. The adults actually playing a Top Secret campaign. Top Secret's a classic spy game, and recently kickstarted a sort of third incarnation called Top Secret New World Order. So on Saturday, those guys will come over and they're trying to exfiltrate a CIA asset who is being held prisoner in the top floor of the Arts Hotel in Barcelona by Catalan nationalists, and they've just discovered that her kid is being held hostage, and they've rescued a guy who they think is her husband, and they're going to try and figure out a way to actually get her out of the building. They will encounter some of the strands of the larger plot as they go. So I don't paint minis for that. I don't know if there are good like spies minis. I'm sure there are, but that's pure theater of the mind. I principally paint minis for fantasy.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I have a 12-year-old son, and about a couple months ago now, we started playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm starting him out with the classic, and he really loves it. I do miss living up in Salt Lake, where there's more opportunity for doing that. There's more people around. There's hardly anybody here. Well, there's nobody here that plays it, so I just have to be the GM to my son and his couple friends, and it's fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Luckily now technology is kind of advanced to where I'm trying to get a couple of my cousins to play. I got Symbaroum. I don't know if you've heard of that, for Christmas. That's what I'm trying to get my cousins to do, that we can do all together online.
Yeah. Fun. I've had pretty hit and miss experiences with Discord and Roll20. I don't know why, but like usually, when I've got one person who's dialed in remotely, it works great. But once I have two, somebody loses audio. At some point, it's a guy that everyone can hear him except me, and I can't hear him, which is a problem because I'm the game master. And so some guy will like talk to me for like a minute, and then I'll realize I can't hear what he's saying.
Right.
But yes, I think I just have bad luck. I think that's a lot of gaming has been able to continue even when people have basically not left their houses.
Right. And that's one thing that's because of the technology you can still kind of do with this COVID lockdown, that you can still get together even if you're apart. So
absolutely.
Well, Dave, is there any tips or tricks that you want to tell us that might help anybody that wants to become a writer?
Wow, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. So this is probably not a tip or a trick. This is an exhortation. Here's what I would say. I would urge you, write the stuff that nobody else but you can write. I think people will tell you, how to be successful, and most of the how to be successful advice sort of sounds like, try and write what everyone else is writing and try and sell it the way everyone else is trying to sell it and make your books look like everybody else's. And that may be the case, that is commercially good advice, but I think the world doesn't need another urban fantasy series which has a woman on the cover showing you her butt and holding a ball of blue magic in her hand. We don't need that. We got a million. You don't need another vampire school, kids at vampire school experiencing first lust. We don't need that. We got a million of those. Okay. Werewolves versus vampires, romance. We don't need that. Write something that is really just something that only you could have written. I think that's the only way that you end up making a lasting and meaningful impact on the culture. Otherwise, you're just swimming in the culture's currents, and you're just going to disappear.
That's great advice. Problem is, you getting bombarded with all those same stories, and you still want to do it. But yeah, that's actually great advice. And we all have a story to tell. I think we all have something that's unique to us. We all have different experiences. Thank you for listening to the TROI podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.